Hey everyone, welcome to the Delmarva Collaborative Funding Forum. We are featuring Jake Reilly with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund to talk about the funding proposals they have available. And I think we can go ahead and get started since it's 12:01. I see some people are still continuing to join. But we're going to start with an overview of DLLC, just very brief. Most of you know about DLLC, so we don't need to spend much time there. And then we're going to turn it over to Jake. There's three RFPs out now for from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, all of which would be very relevant to Delmarva. So we're really glad you're here to learn more about these opportunities. And then we're just going to briefly touch base on next steps. If you have questions, actually, Paula, let me turn it over to you first to go over the kind of how we're going to operate.
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. Just some really basic ground rules today. First, it's not written. I hope everybody's safe and warm today. I know the region's under a blanketed snowstorm. So thanks for joining us during all that. We are asking everybody to stay muted while the speaker is presenting today. And we will take the question and answers in the chat today just to allow us to be able to group some questions and things like that. And it will be recorded. We'll share the link to this video on the Delmarva Land and Litter Collaborative website later this week. So that's all I have. Kristen, you want to add more?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. All
We'll be
right.
monitoring the chat for your questions. So Jake has said we can interrupt him if we need to. So just keep your questions coming. Just real quick overview for the Delmarva Land and Litter Collaborative. We were founded 10 years ago and actually almost 11 years now in 2025, building on some great work that Ernie Shea with Solutions for the Land did with some leading farmers. We are very deeply committed to collaboration and recognize that it takes a lot of people at the table with diverse backgrounds to solve the complex problems that we face with a growing population, feeding ourselves and also wanting to have vibrant and healthy ecosystems and a Chesapeake Bay that we all love so much. So we've got folks from chicken associations, farmers, environmental groups, academia, extension, just basically 30 steering committee members, and we just try to educate ourselves about what the problems are, what potential solutions are, and also share resources like funding opportunities. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Jake Reilly, and he'll be more about NFWF's programs.
Thank you so much. And let me get my slides all situated here, and then I will introduce myself. Oh, it's my email. All right. We seeing the cover slide here? Excellent. Well, thank you so much, folks, for your interest. Thanks for joining today. I'm working from home. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old downstairs causing chaos, so I you might see a visitor. I don't know. I can't promise one way or another, but hope everyone is nice and warm and safe. Really appreciate the opportunity to present really what we have currently, which is 3 open requests for proposals for under NFWF's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund, which I'll mention. I'll sort of get into here in the next slide. But yeah, so quickly, so I'm Jake Reilly, Director of Chesapeake Programs in the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. NFWF is about 40 years old. We are a congressionally chartered foundation created by the U.S. Congress to serve as a partner with federal conservation and resource agencies, leveraging funding from those agencies, but also corporations and other foundations. The way that we operate is we pool resources to be able to design programs that are aimed at addressing landscape scale conservation issues and challenges across the country. We've had a concerted focus in the Chesapeake Bay watershed for more than 25 years now. It's kind of one of our marquee kind of legacy landscapes. Lots of money and resources and opportunities for folks, which is great, but it can also be confusing. So really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this DLLC group and stakeholders about these opportunities. So really, all of our competitive grants programs that NFWF operates here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed are delivered under this umbrella of what we call the Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund. just quickly, the Stewardship Fund is composed of large competitive grants programs. That's what people know us most for. Under the Stewardship Fund, though, we also do provide other resources and services for folks working on restoration work here in the region. So, one of them is we provide directed grant support for key networking and information sharing kinds of partnerships. So, things like the Chesapeake Watershed Forum, Chesapeake Ag Networking Forum, which NFWF hosts close to every year now these days. Um, and then third, we also provide technical assistance funding. So Kristen Hughes Evans, who you already heard from, I'll kind of scoop myself later in the presentation. Kristen and our colleague Natasha are field liaisons on our team. So in addition to me and my staff, we contract for support from folks like Kristen and Natasha to act as an intermediary. Me and my staff, don't have as much time in our calendars to be able to talk to folks about all their great ideas and projects. So we also do provide those resources as well for folks that are interested in interacting with our programs. But when it comes to the conservation and restoration work, really kind of three key focus areas. Probably shouldn't be surprising at this point, but first and foremost, most of our programs and most of our funding still to this date are generated in partnership with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So water quality improvement is the biggest focus across all these programs. We, being the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we're of course also interested in species and habitat restoration and conservation work. And then third, especially in a place with 18 million people, we're seeking to advance that environmental work in close coordination and support from communities and community members in doing this work. So very much in the spirit of why DLLC exists. For folks that want to get a beat, a little bit more detail on our specific sort of conservation restoration priorities, we do have a business plan for our Chesapeake Bay work. Business plans are essentially just strategic plans. I'll note that our current business plan is just actually, now that we're in 2026, just slightly out of date. We had wrote that plan initially in 2012 and then updated it in 2018 to align with a lot of the partnership goals and priorities of the Chesapeake Bay Program partnership. Those didn't go away in 2025. There is a new watershed agreement, but NFWF is really just starting the process now of kind of doing that strategic refresh ourselves. But for now and for these RFPs, the current business plan is a great place to go if you want a little bit more detail on some of the more specific water quality, species, and habitat priorities that we have for our programs. So, fortunately for you all, maybe less fortunately for me and my staff, we have three current RFPs open right now, which is going to be the focus of this webinar. So, the first in time in terms of due dates is the Innovative Nutrient and Sediment Reduction Grants Program. Second is the Small Watershed Grants Program. The INSR and SWIG programs, as we call them, are primarily funded by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And then third, still very exciting. It's now in, I guess it's fourth or fifth year, depending on how you define it. But this Chesapeake Wild program is a direct partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Really exciting addition to our complement of the INSR and SWIG programs, which we've been operating competitively with EPA for going on 25 years now. I will say, and this slide kind of gives me, it's a good place to maybe put this out there first, which is just to say there is a lot of information here contained in all these RFPs. There is a lot of information in this presentation and in these slides. I am not going to be going with the fine-tooth comb over all of these individual fields and those kinds of things. I'll try to hit sort of the major kind of takeaways or important sort of things for folks to be thinking about. But this is a great chance to plug both myself, my staff members, Tori Sullins and Alexander Farega, whose contact information is on our website, as well as our field liaison. So I already mentioned Kristen and Natasha are a part of our field liaison cadre, so they're very tied into the DLLC, so great resources as well. Point there is that we're kind of presenting a lot of information on you. We don't have a lot of time to kind of dive into the details, but really, hopefully, this is just a little bit of an appetizer or a teaser for folks to be able to set up some time to talk with either NFWF staff or our field liaisons if you have questions or really kind of want to pursue thinking about specific project ideas. But this first slide just provides a quick comparison of our three major programs. And you might say three, there's like 6 columns here. So what are you talking about? So we have three primary programs, but for a couple of our programs, we actually have either two or three sort of separate funding tracks or sort of routes that folks can take, right? So going left to right here first, our INSR program, it's all in the title. It's about accelerating implementation of nutrient and sediment load reduction practices. So, for example, lots of work in the ag space. It is kind of our Cadillac water quality program, as we like to think about it. These are grants for between $1 and $2 million. We'll get into the details here, but really some cool changes in this INSR program just this year. We're really looking to extend those grant awards from what used to be about 3-year periods of performance to 5. Lots of focus on collaboration and collaborative models, which is very much in the spirit of DLLC. The second program is our Small Watershed Grants program. So in that program, we have two tracks. We have a planning and technical assistance or PTA track, as well as an implementation track. The SWIG program overall, where the INSR program is explicitly focused on load reductions and water quality work, Small Watershed Grants program exists to provide funding to address any or all of the priorities that are incorporated into the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. So if you want to think about the INSR program is really kind of working in the context of the TMDL and WIPs. Small Watershed Grants program is operating in the context of the watershed agreement. And then our third program, this Chesapeake Wild program, actually has three component funding tracks. So planning and technical assistance tracks, and implementation track, as well as a collaborative conservation track that is really aimed at supporting the development and cultivation of collaborative approaches to advancing the primary goals of the WILD program, which is really around species and habitat conservation work. So again, not that those priorities or interests don't exist in our INSR SWIG programs, but this WILD program is really kind of our laser focused species and habitat restoration program. When it comes to eligibility, again, I won't sort of go cell by cell here, but just some sort of quick takeaways really for all of our programs and any of our tracks. 501(c)(3)s, state government agencies, some nuances there in terms of some of the programs, in terms of eligibility, local governments, municipalities, tribal governments and organizations. Federal governments generally are not really eligible for a lot of our programs, the exception there being the WILD program. And then, unfortunately, for those that sort of work in the, business, individual, international organization space, at least as a primary applicant, those institutions or entities are not eligible for any of our programs. However, through subawards or subcontracts, definitely see a lot of resourcing of those kinds of entities in our programs. But again, each of our RFPs has pretty clear eligibility considerations outlined. So if they're not already in the chat, we'll be sharing links to those RFPs in the chat so you can kind of dive in there. But yeah, just wanted to kind of touch on that quickly. So diving in first and foremost to our INSR program. I'll cut to the chase here in saying that we do have pre-proposals which are due for this INSR program here in just about 2 weeks. So very quickly. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this one first. So this INSR program, as I had mentioned at the outset, directly focused on water quality, very specifically, aimed at providing contributions in terms of implementation outcomes to, in this case, the state of Maryland and Delaware and Virginia's watershed implementation plans. Really cool sort of changes and sort of evolution in this program over the years. Summarizing that, sort of where we are this year is we're really looking to leverage this program to, and especially this pre-proposal stage, to secure really ambitious and aspirational 5-year plans from collaborative partnerships and networks on how they plan to accelerate implementation work, right? Consistent with the watershed implementation plans and existing TMDL commitments. What's cool about the program this year is that 5-year window. They've historically been about 2 to 3-year periods of performance. We're sort of creating this mechanism or avenue to be able to have 5-year grant agreements with folks and up to $2 million for grant awards. In addition to the eligibility sort of slide that I shared earlier, so like 501(c)(3)s can be eligible applicants and grant recipients here. There's sort of an additional flavor of eligibility that we've embedded into this program here, which is that we're really only looking to fund projects that are directly resourcing and supportive of established watershed restoration collaboratives. So yes, you got to be a 501c3. You don't have to be, but 501c3s are eligible applicants. But beyond that, it's not just an organization, that we're looking to fund. We're really looking to fund through this program, these collaborative models. So DLLC is one example of that. Others that you might be familiar based on the landscape, but like the Delmarva Restoration and Conservation Network, Envision the Chop Tank. I mean, there's any number of them that exist out there on the landscape on the Delmarva. So quickly, and again, for folks that have been around our programs, maybe this is more useful because it's a little bit of a different model that we're building out this year. But NFWF operates based on what Congress appropriates every year. So when we think about awarding a 5-year grant, it's not necessarily like we have 5 years worth of funding here. So what we're looking to do is, with this pre-proposal stage, secure these sort of aspirational 5-year plans up to $2 million. But that once we get through sort of the review and award stage, what we're going to be doing at the outset is providing partial awards to those selected projects of up to $1 million that are aimed at covering the first, say, 2 to 3 years of work. As those initial round of awardees are funded and are out there on the landscape doing work, in and around sort of a midpoint, so somewhere around 2028, we're going to be opening the window for those grants awarded this year to come back to us and request funding increases, extend their periods of performance, adjust their scopes, consistent with those 5-year plans. So it's kind of a stepwise kind of incremental funding thing that we're really kind of going for here. We are only able to commit to that first 2 to 3 years of money. So even if we award a grant based on that 5-year plan that was submitted to us at this pre-proposal stage, we're not going to be funding folks for 5 years at the outset, right? That's kind of the vibe here. Last bullet here, I'll just state, it's on this slide. It's really applicable to all of our programs, just to clarify that generally the way that NFWF works is we provide funding on a reimbursable basis. So if you get $1 million grant here with this program or any of our programs, it's not like NFWF is cutting you a check at the start of the grant. Really, you're out there incurring costs, performing activities, and then NFWF reimburses you for those costs. So we do have in this INSR program 2 primary priorities. We've been having lots of consultations with folks, so just want to sort of take this moment to clarify that we are not looking for projects in this INSR program that are addressing either priority 1 or priority 2, which you'll hear about in a second. We're really looking for projects that are addressing both, right? At the same time, and we view those priorities as sort of complementary in a way. So the first priority, again, back to the purpose of this program, is accelerating implementation of watershed restoration practices and approaches. You could think of those as accelerating BMP implementation. We have under priority 1, 5 articulated strategies. Again, it's not quite rocket science. And I think across these 5 strategies probably represents all or most of what anyone doing water quality work in the region would want to do. But we do kind of have them articulated here to kind of help folks kind of think themselves, but also communicate to us kind of how their proposed implementation work is aligning with kind of high-level strategies that we have in the program. So strategy 1, accelerating priority upland practices. So this really incorporates all of our ag work, for example, but also things like urban stormwater practices as well. Strategy 2, very specifically, we have, beyond the sort of upland BMPs, if you want to think of them that way, long history in this program of working to support practices in and around and adjacent to our sensitive riparian ecosystem. So principally riparian forest buffers, things like livestock exclusion fencing and supporting practices. I'll also just say that given the landscape here, it's not like we don't like grass buffers. So grass buffers as well are a perfectly acceptable and applicable practice in this program. Strategy 3 is really kind of building on a lot of examples, I would say, but also just lots of history across the landscape of really focusing implementation work in place so that as we're out there pursuing creditable nutrient sediment load reductions, we're also being able to aggregate practices in specific systems or sub-watersheds or catchments so that we're able to further accelerate actual meaningful restoration and environmental improvements sort of in place, right? I'll just throw out here as an example, just based on the landscape that we're talking about, Maryland's whole Watershed Act and sort of the vibe there of really kind of focusing resources in place is an example of that. Not to say that with Strategy 3, we're only interested in funding whole Watershed Act places, but just for folks that have been sort of thinking about that over the last couple of years, that's kind of an example in a way of kind of what we're talking about with strategy 3. Strategy 4 is, in recognition of this idea that, we need with this program to be implementing work that does contribute to the watershed implementation plans and achievement of the TMDL, but we're also very interested in supporting practices that are generating other co-benefits for things like species and habitat, but also, again, in this landscape, things like resilience as well. And then strategy 5 is cool, especially I think in some ways with respect to the DLLC, given sort of what the priorities of the focus are. Over the last 6, 7, 8 years with this INSR program, we've been very explicitly focused on sort of just funding practices that have established efficiencies and approvals under the TMDL. Now that we're sort of past 2025 and in consultation with our state agency partners, really opening this program back up to novel practices and technologies. So they might not have an established efficiency or they might not be currently creditable, through the Chesapeake Bay Watershed model. But we're, still interested and I think increasingly in sort of a renewed interest here in using this program to be able to support innovative technologies and practices that might be on that sort of vanguard of like the next generation of restoration work on the ground. So that was priority 1, right? Accelerating implementation, getting more BMPs on the ground. Priority 2 is really focused, and again, this is a complementary priority, is really around enhancing the ability of collaboratives to sustain and expand implementation. And this has been the biggest source of questions and discussion amongst folks consulting with us with this INSR program. This priority really builds on, honestly, priorities that we've had in this program over the last about 7 or 8 years, but really validated and I think refined based on an independent evaluation that we just completed with the INSR program. We just did a webinar a couple weeks ago on that evaluation. There are links to those recordings and resources on the RFP webpage. But the point here is that we have seen, based on our evaluation of running these programs over decades now, that really the most impactful projects that we're seeing on the landscape in terms of accelerating implementation are really focused on delivering that work through and in support of these collaborative models for watershed restoration. So at a very basic level, this means, more than one organization working together, leveraging skills, resources, and capacities. We see, especially when we think about watershed work and the scale of BMPs that are necessary, collaboration is not just a nice to have. It's not something that just sort of gets you extra points, but that collaboration and collaborative models are sort of essential and a key ingredient and a limiting factor in terms of scaling work. So really the second priority is in recognition of that and trying to make clear for folks that, we're interested not just in accelerating implementation work, but very specifically doing it sort of through and in support of these collaborative models. So in addition to activities and investments that we might fund under priority 1, so things like actual just, construction costs of BMPs, under priority 2, we are interested in sort of further strengthening these collaborative models. So funding for things like coordination capacity, development of shared purpose and goals, things like strategic plans, right? Systems and infrastructure. So, computer systems or, those kinds of things. Really a whole boatload of work or opportunities to just sort of fine tune and strengthen how partners work together to get the stuff done. And of course, lots more detail in the RFP, lots more detail in these webinars that I referenced. So for anyone that wants to kind of dive in there, there's a lot more substance. Most importantly, or maybe not most importantly, but importantly, the timeline here for the program. So we released the INSR RFP back before the holidays in mid-December. We did a webinar earlier this month. Again, that recording is on our webpage. A similar workshop and briefing on that evaluation that I mentioned. The important thing here is that pre-proposals are due February 12th. So it's about just over 2 weeks from now. We will then stand up our review process sometime around probably late March. We'll be issuing invitations to the full proposal stage. Full proposals will be due sometime in May. And then for this program, as well as the other 2 that I'll be talking about, award decisions will be made in August and communicated accordingly. We do have requirement in this INSR RFP that folks actually do consult with us. For the SWIG and the WILD programs, that's an optional thing. We strongly encourage it. For the INSR program, it's a requirement. So if you're interested in pursuing a pre-proposal through the INSR program and you haven't done so already, schedule a consultation with us. We have this January 26th deadline. I can say here that we can be flexible on that. But the intent there and sort of this idea that those consultations are required about 2 weeks ahead of the proposal is really just based on the fact that, we want to be able to catch folks before they really sort of spend too much time and effort on a proposal, make sure that there's a fit, a chance for us to offer any constructive feedback, that kind of thing. So definitely take advantage of those consultations. I think our current bookings link is already full up. So if folks haven't scheduled yet and are looking to schedule, if you're seeing no times available in the bookings link, you can email me. Tori Sullins is another contact listed on that RFP. You can just email us and we could probably find some time to fit you in here ahead of the pre-proposal deadline.
Hey, Jake, before you
Yes.
move from INSR, we had one question from Emily who wants to know if NFWF is shifting INSR to this 5-year funding model moving forward, or is this just for this funding cycle?
Excellent question. And one thing we try to do in our programs is not change things year on year and not have one RFP one year that's completely different than the RFP the next year, right? So to answer that, our intent is that this shift to 5 years is a quote unquote permanent thing. So it's not just this year. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, it's this crazy 5-year thing. I don't know if it's going to be out there next year. I better put something in this year. Our intent is to have that moving forward. So good question. All right, so some key questions, things you might want to think about, but also that we've been asking, with folks coming to us is, again, this collaborative thing, it's not a nice to have. It's sort of a key component, an eligibility consideration, so to speak. So thinking about what your collaborative is, we have in the RFP a little bit more definition of what we actually mean by collaborative. I will just say the intent of how we've defined that is that it is very broad, right? So don't immediately think that you don't have a collaborative or you don't exist within one, right? The answer is probably more that you do, and just maybe need some help kind of thinking about that. Specifically, as we think about the collaborative and especially investments in that collaborative capacity, really important to think about how the collaboratives work, really kind of directly aligns with and supports this primary goal of accelerating implementation. So this isn't we're not just interested in funding collaboration for collaboration's sake, right? This is really intentionally funding collaborative models for the pursuit of and to accelerate implementation of BMPs. And then, of course, we're always interested, right? And you'll have to spell out in detail, like, what do you need the funding for, right? So lots of history, and it can be pretty honestly straightforward when it comes to just funding BMP work, especially as it gets into that priority 2 and investments in collaborative capacity. Help us understand kind of how you are looking to use funding to accelerate or enhance, I should say, your ability to work together as a collaborative. The key contacts for INSR, I've already said it here, but myself, Tori on my team, this field liaison slide, we've got it in all of our RFPs, so contact information there. I will just draw some attention to Sarah Clark specifically on our field liaison team. Sarah is with the Institute for Conservation Leadership. We've explicitly brought Sarah and ICL on to our field liaison team because of their expertise on collaborative and organizational capacity and development. So especially for folks that are kind of having trouble kind of thinking about the collaborative kind of aspect of this versus the implementation side of things, Sarah can be specifically a great resource among our field liaison team. All right, shifting to program number 2, our small watershed grants program. So I already mentioned that this program has sort of 2 component funding tracks. One is this implementation track. The second is this planning and technical assistance track. The key point there is that implementation grants, we are expecting implementation to happen. So we are expecting practices to be going into the ground, right? So whether they're water quality practices or, as I mentioned earlier, other restoration actions and activities or conservation work that supports the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. Versus planning and technical assistance grants, we know that planning, design, any number of different sort of component activities are necessary to be able to sort of get to the point of being able to implement projects in the future. So the planning and technical assistance track exists to be able to provide relatively smaller amounts of resources to kind of help folks get some of those important activities done so that maybe in a future grant down the road, or maybe you're going to DNR, in a couple of years, being able to kind of provide funding on more of those planning and technical assistance kinds of activities to help inform and advance future implementation work. The key, and there's probably a timeline slide here, maybe coming up on this program. INSR, the pre-proposals are due in just a couple weeks. For SWIG and for WILD, there is no pre-proposal stage, I'll just say quickly. And then full proposals are not due until early April. So a lot more time, but time starts ticking. But you still have about 2 months before those proposals are going to be due for the SWIG program. We have a number of priorities, of course, for the SWIG program, similarly to the INSR program. So priority number one, very aligned with the water quality work on just more of that sort of uplands work, so ag and urban runoff. Priority two sort of reflects, reinforces one of those strategies you heard with the INSR program, so specifically those kind of stream and riparian practices. Priority number three, and this gets to the beyond just water quality considerations for this program, specifically supporting work for brook trout. Not really much of that going on the Delmarva, of course, but for what it's worth. Definitely on the Delmarva, though, priority number four, so enhancing wetlands and tidal work, specifically for species like black duck, but also broader resilience benefits. We also have priorities for oyster reef restoration, again, consistent with the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And then priority five is sort of doubling down on that sort of resilience consideration. And for us, it's resilience both for human communities, so using natural and nature-based solutions to benefit human communities, but also, of course, species and habitat that exist here in the Bay Watershed. And then last priority, and not just for the planning and technical assistance grants, right? But this idea of kind of building capacity. So, very similar, I think, in a lot of ways to priority number two under the INSR program. But really, this priority kind of represents a lot of the interstitial stuff, you might call it, that maybe, of course, we're all focused on restoration outcomes and acres and those kinds of metrics, but there's lots of activities that are important to kind of build the capacity to pursue that work, on an ongoing basis. So development of partnerships, outreach to landowners, watershed and habitat assessments, design and permitting work, those kinds of things. And here's your key program date slide. We do have an applicant webinar coming up for the SWIG program next week. We also do have a webinar for Field Doc. I won't dive into the details here, but Field Doc is a platform that we've developed and furnished to really support really high resolution spatial tracking of restoration work on the landscape. We also do have a webinar there for folks at the application stage. The key one there is the proposals are due April 2nd at 12 noon. Just wanted to underscore that. We used to have proposals due at midnight. That was crazy, and there really wasn't a reason for it. So we are now having proposals due at noon timeframe. So just be mindful of that. Then we'll get into reviews in April, June, and July. And as I mentioned with the INSR program, SWIG grants as well will be approved in August, and we'll look to announce those awards sometime in August or September. Okay, now getting into the last but certainly not least program is this Chesapeake Wild program. So I mentioned it's primarily funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We do have the same sort of two tracks that we had in the SWIG program. So this idea of implementation versus planning and technical assistance, implementation projects really kind of requiring and expecting actual conservation and restoration work to actually happen over the course of the grant versus planning and technical assistance grants to fund all of the kind of component kind of steps, in that process of ultimately advancing future implementation work. What's unique about the WILD program is this track in the middle, this collaborative conservation track. So in a way, it kind of is, I think, carrying forward the spirit of this sort of collaboration focus that we have in the INSR program. With the WILD program, we have this like dedicated track, grants up to $200,000 that are really looking to support and enhance partnerships, networks, and other collaborative models, very specifically working to advance species and habitat work. I'll mention for the WILD program, and might get to it in a slide or two here, but The key sort of a feature of the WILD program versus our kind of legacy EPA funded programs is this program is very specifically focused on supporting work that improves the viability of species of greatest conservation need. So you might think about with the INSR program, certainly like the watershed implementation plans being sort of the important kind of formative kind of guiding documents for folks to be able to align to. With the WILD program, an analog to that would be like the state wildlife action plans, right? So yes, there's lots and lots of opportunities to do species and habitat improvement work across the Bay watershed. The most competitive projects are going to be ones that are kind of directly speaking to species of greatest conservation need, identified either at the state level through their swaps or more regional assessments of species of conservation need. Instead of priorities for the WILD program, we have pillars. They're kind of the same thing, right? In concept, they're just kind of priorities for the program. So there's 5 pillars. Um, they're not, I think as we've sort of evolved this program over time, we've kind of refined our messaging and communications to folks. So really the expectation is that any competitive proposal, any proposal that we're going to ultimately fund needs to address priority number 1. So you have got to be doing work that is meaningfully advancing efforts to restore, conserve, or connect fish and wildlife habitat. Um, then we have sort of additional pillars that are related to, supportive of pillar number 1, right? We'll get into those in a bit more. I'll actually stick on it here. So pillar number 2 for us is a water quality pillar. I think the distinction to make with the WILD program versus the SWIG and the INSR program is that, SWIG and INSR and boatloads of other funding is really kind of focused on load reductions for achieving the TMDL. When it comes to water quality in the WILD program, the specific thread is very specifically addressing water quality as it relates to fish and wildlife species, right? So there might be a water quality issue or a water management issue, for a specific population of waterfowl, for example. That's really what we're looking for here. If you're just doing work to kind of pursue load reductions for the TMDL, SWIG or the INSR program are going to be the fit. Pillar number 3 under the WILD program, again, sort of relates to the resilience priority that I mentioned with the SWIG program, but is really kind of this idea of natural and nature-based solutions to advance resiliency, again, specifically for at-risk species and their associated habitats. Pillar number 4 is kind of unique in the WILD program. So, this program was created in part to be able to help support public access here in the region. I will say this is not a program that is doing just basic public access project. There needs to be a nexus to restoring, conserving, or connecting fish and wildlife habitat. So it's not your program for, your random boat launch, right? There's got to be sort of a meaningful connection to advancing species and habitat restoration work as a part of that public access work. And then pillar 5 is really focused on this, again, capacity building, partnership development, those kinds of things to be able to continue to accelerate and scale fish and wildlife habitat conservation work across the landscape. So great slide here, a little bit on sort of this definition. So I already mentioned, in terms of species and what's going to be competitive for this program, there's boatloads of species that live and exist in the Bay watershed. Really specifically, the most competitive projects under the WILD program are going to be, providing meaningful benefits or outcomes for things like species identified as at risk by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So, T&E species, for example, but broader than just that. Species of greatest conservation need as identified in state wildlife action plans, regional species of greatest conservation need identified by NFWF, Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and or species identified in tribal stewardship or fish and wildlife plans. We're expecting that proposal narratives should reference and incorporate, as related to that imperiled species definition, really specifically telling us what they're doing for what species, right? So this isn't, I think there is an expectation for folks to be competitive that you're able to actually legitimately tell us how the work you're doing is benefiting one of these imperiled species. It's not just, hey, trees are good for all sorts of things kind of thing, right? Being able to very clearly sort of make those connections. And of course, with this program, but really kind of all of our programs, things like coordination with and letters of support from key fish and wildlife agencies is important in this program. For the wild program, important deadlines. So again, we've got proposal labs set up, which is really just your opportunity to quickly schedule time with myself and my team. So we have windows there. We have an applicant webinar. That one is actually going to be tomorrow. So if you're interested in the wild program and haven't signed up yet, definitely register. We'll also have a field doc webinar. Field doc less important for the wild program, but it's the shared webinar with the SWIG program. So that link is there. The important deadline here is April 9th. So the SWIG proposals are due April 2nd, so a week later, wild proposals will be due. We'll then be sort of getting into our review timeframe, again, April, June, July, and then awards decided in August and announced sometime in late August or September. All right, getting sort of to the back end and then can sort of open it up for questions or those kinds of things. Just some bullets that I think Kristen Hughes Evans helped to kind of furnish here based on her expertise in longevity with these programs. So things like, we get questions, can you fund equipment? I would say this isn't quite accurate in that, like, yes, we can fund equipment. These are federal funds, so there's all sorts of requirements that come along with using federal funds for the purchase of equipment. So what we tend to tell folks is like, yes, we can do it. You're probably benefited by thinking about buying equipment with other sources of funding, but it's not impossible. So to the extent equipment purchases are a part of a proposal, can talk about that and even kind of what qualifies, right, as equipment for any of these programs. Already mentioned this, but funding is reimbursable. You got to incur those expenses first, and you get reimbursement from us. Definitely read the RFP. I was on a consultation just earlier, and someone was telling me they've read the RFP for the INSR program now like 5 or 6 times, and each time they read it, they get something new. So read the RFP, but also reread the RFP. You would be amazed the proposals that we get where it is very apparent that folks just did not read what we put in the RFP. So that's definitely the place to start. For our EPA funded programs, so INSR and SWIG, if you are performing environmental data collection, there are unfortunately requirements associated with the development of quality assurance project plans. So that's a whole other rabbit hole to potentially kind of dive down. If you do have questions on that, again, read about it in the RFPs, but if you have questions on the QAP process, as we call it, that's a great thing that you can sort of ask about, when you're meeting with me or my staff or a field liaison. We'll also share more on the QAP requirements on our upcoming SWIG webinar as well for folks. I'll also mention too, not QAPs, but with the Fish and Wildlife Service funding, so with the WILD program, NEPA requirements do apply there as well. So NEPA is a necessary piece of the WILD program. Similarly, we'll talk about it on tomorrow's WILD webinar, but we can discuss that with interested applicants, on a consultation as well. Field Doc, again, is basically a platform that we've developed to really kind of most directly track and support reporting of water quality improvement practices. The Field Doc platform has changed a lot, honestly, over the last year or so. So if you've got familiar with Field Docs 4 years ago and haven't hit it since, definitely would encourage you to kind of get in, poke around the system as well. But like I said, we do have a webinar coming up for Field Doc specifically. So that's another great way to hear directly from John Dawes and the team at the Commons who helps kind of furnish that platform on the latest and greatest with Field Doc. Last bullet here, can't stress it enough. Come find us and talk to us. I know different funders, different programs operate their own ways for all sorts of reasons. We at NFWF really try and I think really love and intend to be exceptionally approachable with folks. So we really like to talk to folks about their project idea, right? So whether that's me and Tori or Alexander or our field liaisons, this is free advice. We are here to talk to you. I'll say that there's nothing more frustrating than getting a proposal from someone who didn't talk to us, that if they had just talked to us, we could have told them, A, just what you want is not a fit for the program, or B, with just a little bit of conversation, we could have offered some really good kind of strategic advice to kind of how to better position a proposal. So you're not bugging us, you're not burdening us if you want to reach out and talk. So We have links in all of these RFPs to sort of schedule things directly with me and my staff. We have contact information in the RFPs for all of our field liaisons. Um, Take as much advantage of that as you want. One thing, it doesn't have to work this way, but for example, something that has worked well a lot in the past is, maybe kicking the tires on an idea with the field liaisons to just kind of get a sense of, hey, does this seem like something NFWF would want to fund? Field liaisons have a lot of expertise and can offer some insights. Armed with those conversations and some of the thinking from our field liaisons, it can then be a great step to schedule a consultation with us so that you're not coming in blind, right? You've had a chance to talk to someone that exists within our program to kind of fine tune a potential proposal before you submit it. So contact information here, it's on our website. It's listed in the RFPs, but for what it's worth, email is best to try to sort of catch us. I would say we also do have this very sort of hopefully relatively seamless way that folks can just schedule consultations with us linked to the RFP. So you can email us, but maybe the more efficient thing for any of us is really just kind of find those bookings links in the RFPs to schedule some time to talk to us. And then our field liaisons as well. So just like amazing, amazing resources and expertise. If I dared to tally up the expertise and history of all these individuals on this, I mean, we have got easily 150 years of expertise in aggregate and experience building and managing work, advancing restoration, advancing partnerships. So just a tremendous, tremendous resource that NFWF pays for to have available for interested applicants to kind of talk through project ideas, help make connections, help improve potential ideas. So definitely would encourage folks to take advantage of our field liaisons as well. And with that, I think I will stop share. And I promised you I was going to like spit a lot at you, and your head is probably spinning like, oh my God, like where do I even start? So I see Kristen has come back on my screen, so you see her. But all to say, I'm happy to answer questions here, but definitely I would be shocked if you don't leave this webinar with more questions than you had answered. And so we are here to help you think through and answer those questions. So
Thank you, Jake.
yes.
We have asked for Q&A in the chat. So you've already answered one of them about the cycle. There's another one about, have there been any evaluations based on the monitoring of species, habitat quality, or water quality? Someone is looking for examples of theoretical versus actual measurements.
So that's a great question. That's a pretty broad question, and I would say this that you know, as it relates to water quality work, I mean, I think our base kind of measurement kind of tool, quite honestly, is the Chesapeake Bay Watershed model. So in that way, we leverage a lot of the very robust processes and systems that exist to be able to sort of get to validated and approved efficiencies for water quality. Um, Stepping that down, short answer is uh, not that no, those kinds of assessments have not been done. I think that there is no shortage of opportunities for us to be able to fund and better resource those kinds of things so that we can better sort of connect and understand the investments certainly that we're making in these programs, but the kinds of work that we fund, we are not the only ones that fund it, right? So just more generally speaking, we're very interested. I would say that, you know, monitoring proposals or proposals to do just that could be fits. I think ultimately all of these programs, though, are aimed at doing more on the ground. So the ability to think about assessments and whatever that apply to informing future work is probably the way to think about it. But hopefully that's at least somewhat of a helpful answer to that question.
That sounds great. Thank you. I don't see others right now, but I do want to thank you again for the very clear explanation of the programs and the deadlines. I heard clearly the tips: read and then reread the proposals, and don't forget to take advantage of the free advice and counsel by scheduling a time with one of the field liaisons. So, are there other questions that people have in the chat? Seeing any others? No, we've got about 10 more minutes and we don't need to take up the time. While we're waiting for that, I'm also going to share We do. And Allison, I can't see the chat anymore right now. So if you see anything else, please flag it for us. We are also having another similar webinar on February 12th with the USDA NRCS funding programs with Susie Daubert, who I believe has signed on to this one to at least get a lay of the land and listen into this. And so Allison is going to put a link to the registration for that in the chat as well. And that's really what Delmarva Land and Litter Collaborative is about, is trying to provide resources for the network, for the groups of people that are working to restore and protect the Delmarva Peninsula, making it livable for all, understanding the connections of farming and poultry and how those really fit in with the landscape there. So I don't know if there are any other questions or if we can go ahead and wrap this up. Okay, well then, thank you again, Jake and Kristen. And this has been recorded. We will add this to the Delmarva Land and Litter Collaborative website later this week. The link is there in the middle. And with that, thank you again, Jake, for joining us and spending your lunchtime with us and everyone else.
Thanks so much. Stay warm.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.